Warriors is a 1979 American action thriller film directed by Walter Hill, starring Michael Beck, James Remar, and Deborah Van Valkenburg. Can you dig it? Welcome back to the Cult of Films. I'm John, the host, and once again, I'm joined by Mr. Jason Alls.
Hooligans, come out to play. That was an $8 bit I just did. When else am I going to drink Stubbies? It was worth it. I'm drinking a Coors Banquet for a bit.
Coors, the banquet beer.
I don't think I'm that method.
I was going to paint my face.
That would have been sweet.
Yeah, but I opted not to paint my face or go shirtless with just a vest.
Whenever the option is stubby or banquet beer or face painting, I think I would go face painting. You know what? That scene, jumping to the very end of this film already, the Warriors come out to play, played by Twin Peaks alum David Patrick Kelly.
I think I'm high.
I vividly remember that scene when I was a kid, and I always thought that the Warriors, like when it was on in the background when my older siblings were watching it, I thought it was a horror, because that is such a creepy bit.
Warriors, come out to play. Warriors, come out to play.
Well, that's why he said he did it. He said there was a dude in his neighborhood who used to be like, Davey, and he was like, that shit's creepy.
When you're creeping out David Patrick Kelly, you're a super creep, because he's got that, like, patented lockdown.
Well, he does now. I mean, jumping around to the middle of the film, he was on Broadway, and he was playing, like, a hippie who sang and played the guitar, and they're like, that's our Richard III looking dude. They're like, you're going to be a villain now forever. And he's like, I don't know. And they're like, you're like Richard III. And he's like, all right.
Yeah, T-Bird in The Crow.
What the fuck are you supposed to be, man?
This was his debut. This was a lot of these actors' debut film. Like, T-Bird was perfect, but you could see a lot of Luther. You could see a lot of Luther. In that character.
Mm-hmm.
He said something to the effect of, like, what'd you think of the film? And his mom's just like, oh, you almost look like a tough guy.
Well, it's so funny. This was a very New York production. They picked all of these people off Broadway, working, doing small off-Broadway stuff. They cast this film as much as possible. Cast and crew from New York. I think, like, the only person from LA was their first AD that they brought in to replace a dude they fired.
Right, correct.
And he was like, I better kick someone's ass the first day or make someone become someone's bitch. And they're like, it's just New York. These aren't prison rules. Calm down. So he did a fine job as first AD, because it turns out if you can make films in LA, you can make them in New York. But you kind of get some of that grittiness. A lot of these people, and like a lot of the extras, they don't look like LA extras. These aren't people that went out to LA to wait tables at the California Pizza Kitchen and do auditions. These are people that were, working, in New York off Broadway, or I guess on Broadway, some of them. They were working actors. Casting this with people from New York, they just looked a little grittier, even though they really weren't. These are nerdy ass theater kids kicking the shit out of each other.
But it gave them a home, right? And they did cast, like, in the big scene. There was a lot of, like, local kind of gang people, and that AD from California was such a badass. They gave him the reins to be the voice of God because they had so many people in that scene, so they had to have someone on the loudspeaker, and they let him kind of crowd control and listen. Everyone kind of said that their favorite performance and their favorite just moment of the filmmaking of this movie was during Cyrus's speech, because he was, like, so charismatic, and everyone, like, all that reaction was legit. Like, he was really fueling these people.
Now, there ain't but 20,000 police in the whole town. Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
That was a Shakespearean delivery.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I can dig it.
I
do
dig it, yeah.
Not to get too ahead of ourselves, like, it was worth pointing out that when you watch this film, going into it, if you've never seen it before, just think about it as like, as much as these are theater kids, these are New York theater kids. These people took these same subways to go to auditions. These people lived in the same shitty neighborhoods, you know, with like these real gangsters. And at the time, late 70s, early 80s, this movie was believable because there was such a huge gang problem, to the extent that like the police had to tell them which neighborhoods to take their fake gang colors off in. And they told them which actual gang territory to avoid when they were shooting. So like, this was a movie for a specific time and place. And while that doesn't, if you've never lived in New York, and if you've never lived in New York in like 1978,
right,
you know, you might not get this, but I think for a lot of people, this film really resonated because it encapsulated what that street culture was like really well for a movie that was kind of a goof and based on a Greek tragedy.
Exactly. And it was a bit of a goof, and like you said, because every time it started getting a little too serious, Walter Hill, the director of the film, is just like, we need to kind of comic this up a little bit, because once he started viewing this as a comic book story and how it is this like collection of set pieces, he's just like, oh, it kind of fell into place, and it opened up, because he had a real hard time connecting with it as far as like shooting it goes. He's like, okay, it's kind of messy, I understand it is this Greek tragedy, but if you think about it in these panels and whatnot, and he's just like, at first we were planning on doing the scene with the baseball furies with no music, but he's like, it was just too violent, it was too brutal, so you add a little bit of that music, the score that they had, and it makes it a little lighter, even though what you're seeing is the same thing. So it kind of tricks your brain a little bit.
So John, what is The Warriors?
The source material is inspired by this Greek story. I think it was like post-Sparta, where a group of Greeks kind of went into Persia, and then they kind of got in over their heads, so they decided to try to escape, and all they had to do was get to the water. It's a very straightforward story. So what The Warriors is back, like you said, in the 1970s, everything is kind of controlled by these gangs, or at least these neighborhoods. The gang members outnumber the police, I think 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. And so you have the central figure of Cyrus, who is still a faction leader, has kind of taken the reins, united the group in one common purpose: to take over the streets. Things happen, he dies, and then chaos ensues once again. And with one central puppeteer kind of blaming it on this one group for, I mean, I think it was just convenience, right?
Yeah. Well, he's the one that fired the shot. So
right, correct.
There's this big convention of all the gangs, and someone kills the guy who brought everyone together, and he blames it on this group of the Warriors, and they become Xenophon's Greek warriors.
Right.
From the story Anabasis, they have to make it to the sea, and instead of the sea, it's Coney Island. And you know, they're not going to get in boats and take off, but they do have 120 of the warriors that weren't picked to represent the gang at this convention waiting. So if they can make it to Coney Island, they have enough reinforcements that they'll be okay. The writer Sol Yurick basically just wrote warrior stuff for the screen, but he was a novelist, and he was someone who worked in the New York City Department of Welfare. So he knew a lot about gang culture, and I think he saw a lot of parallels between 1970s gang culture in New York and this story of Xenophon. You know, that became, the story is known as Anabasis. So he wrote the book. No one gave a shit about the book.
I think Lawrence Gordon found it on a rack with no cover on it. Just took a flyer on it.
Yeah, but he, for whatever reason, he just read the book and liked it. That happens a lot, you know? John Cusack and the Grifters just read a book, and he's like, yeah, this has to be a movie. Let's do this. So it was real cheap to buy the rights to this, and not doing it as sort of like a novel, but doing it as a comic book, I think really worked to serve kind of how cartoonish they made it, where all the gangs weren't just guys in black leather jackets with guns. It was these people in these bright colorful, matching thematic uniforms.
People on roller skates.
Very comic book. And
yes.
a lot of slow-mo.
Yes.
Any big impact or good action shot, they only did slow-mo from one angle. So anytime someone knocked down a door or kicked somebody through a piece of plywood or hit someone with a chair, they did a nice slow-mo shot, and it gave everything a real cartoony look. The version of the DVD I bought initially before I bought a different one, they really comic booked it up where they did comic book panel screen wipes. They're like, we wanted to show how comic booky this was, so they actually added in post these like rotoscoped overlays that looked like you were turning the page of the comic book when they did like a scene transition, which like I'm like, you don't need to beat me over the head with a chair. I'm not a female Puerto Rican gang member with a knife.
You're not a Lizzie. Yeah.
Yeah, they hit a girl with a chair in this movie. That was intense.
In slow-mo, you got to see it all.
But there was wacky music, so you're cool with it, I guess. She had a knife. It's fine.
That was the bridge too far, right? Because everyone was just like, oh, yeah, it's a comic book. But then, like you said, they added those rotoscopes. Those wipes were just kind of ridiculous. And they're just like, okay, we need to ground this a little bit.
Well, that was just for like a 25th anniversary DVD release or something like that. That was my fault for buying it.
And Walter Hill likes to make sure that the audience knows, or at least that's what he was trying to portray. There is a lot of levity in here, and it is such an absurd... It's a straightforward premise, but it's an absurd chain of events. And it's supposed to feel familiar, but set in a different world. This isn't supposed to be the New York although it is. The lighting in the subway cars is a little bit, ultra realistic with added fluorescence. And I think the DP even Andrew Laszlo even added like different color fluorescence just to make everything look a little bit off and a little bit dreamlike.
Walter Hill has got the craziest filmography. And when you look at what the guy's done, you're like, yes, absolutely, he would be somebody that would direct this movie, because it's like a cross between Streets of Fire and 48 Hours, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is just, it's the perfect marriage of everything he's ever done.
I think he cut his teeth on this, and then, I mean, this is more remembered, and I think more beloved, and it has more of a cult following. But Streets of Fire, you could see so much of the Warriors in it, but it just seems a little bit more refined.
Let's try it again, punk.
And he figured a lot of stuff out on this. And another thing, like where Lawrence Gordon, this was an accident that it even got made because he just took a flyer on a paperback, is this, they weren't even making this film. They were making a Western. And then they had everything ready. They were about to start shooting, and then at the very last second, they pulled the funding out from underneath the entire thing. It crumpled. So luckily, Lawrence Gordon had some pull at Paramount. So he pulled some strings. He's like, "Hey, are you still interested in kind of making this thing?" And he's just like, "I guess." Learn on the job. It was like day to day. They were really figuring it out, but they took the time to get it right also. It wasn't slapped together.
They took the time to get it right, but at the same time, there were other gang movies coming out at the exact same time, namely The Wanderers.
The Wanderers, yes.
And they pulled triple shifts on editing to get this film out first. Now, nobody remembers The Wanderers, and people remember The Warriors. Is it because they were first to cinema? No, it's because there's a guy in a goddamn baseball outfit fighting with a ball bat like it's a katana in a Kurosawa film. That's why people remember The Warriors, because it didn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
This was from the guy that directed Red Heat, for Christ's sake. So The Warriors was always just going to have those moments that stuck with you. But also, it was just going to be much more enjoyable because, like, as much as there weren't gags for laughs per se,
right,
it just felt like there was a bit more cartoonishness and levity, that they didn't want the violence to be too violent. You know, they wanted it just to be like this is a thing that happened versus here's the point of the movie. And I think the fact that there weren't blood and guts, it wasn't gratuitous. I think that's kind of why it feels more fun to watch. I don't know if you've seen The Wanderers, but I wouldn't watch that again.
What this movie has is a real pulse. It has, of course, like a ticking time clock, because you have this group that we're focused on, and we don't even have a lot of background. It could have really picked anybody, like David Kelly's character could have picked any of the other gangs, and that's who would be following, because it's literally just the Warriors because there's a hit on them.
There he is! That's him! That's the Warrior! He shot Cyrus!
So, okay, we have this group. This is who we're tethered to. Let's go. But just the fact that they're constantly moving and constantly running away, and it lends that kind of groundedness of they're not stopping to brawl with every one of them. The Warriors, the group themselves, they're kind of nerdy at the beginning of the film. They're kind of like the wimpy outcast, really. There's a lot more vicious gangs out there, like the school bus, like filled with skinheads, or even the roller punks that are all like packing, switchblades and stuff. So Luther's character maybe picked them because he didn't really find them so much as a threat. It could have just been because the one guy was staring at him when he pulled the trigger. But I like that you get that arc where they kind of have to toughen up, and the ones that maybe are too tough, and because not all of them are good, like some of them are complete assholes, like Ajax.
Oh, you don't get it. I like it rough. Why, lady? Come on, lady.
We're seeing an attempted rape on screen. So, but it's all these moral challenges that this group has to overcome, as well as just trying to run to the coastline for their lives. At this point, this movie came out in 1979. Jason, why are we talking about the Warriors?
I initially watched this movie just because it was on so many, like, here's 25 cult movies you need to see before you die lists. And I think people who haven't seen this movie I think everyone's seen a picture of the Baseball Furies or the Gramercy Riffs or the Hi-Hats or like some of these colorful groups. Everyone's heard Can You Dig It, whether they know what it's from or not. For whatever reason, I think the amount of levity but like also excitement, I think the on-screen chemistry between Michael Beck and Debbie von Valkenburg, for whatever reason, there are iconic performances from first-time actors. This crew was basically the crew from Bowfinger, where they they were day laborers who eventually, by the end of the film, were a real tight film crew. It's just like everybody cut their teeth on this movie. It wasn't, just Walter Hill. So I think everybody believed in this project and they were super into it because everybody was hungry. These people didn't move to LA to be in movies. These people were working as actors in New York, where you could act, but you weren't doing a ton of film. As much as they set a lot of movies in New York, and there were 5 different movie productions going on in New York at the same time, which made it really tough to find locations and crew. They got the kind of the bottom of the barrel crew because they put this together at the last minute when the Western fell through. So when you have kind of an underdog story like that, a lot of the people in the movie, I will say they were hungry. They wanted to do a good job. And I think whether it was an accident or whether it was like sheer brilliance, I think they made a lot of really good small decisions that kind of snowballed into making the film really easy to follow. The first good decision that may or may not have been an accident was they cut the scene at the beginning of the movie.
Yes.
Where they had a real, like a 5, 6, 7, 8 minute exposition for like, we're going to the gang meeting tonight.
Right.
Who are we going to take to the gang meeting? You're the 8 guys we're taking. You're representing all 120 members of the war. Like, just spoon feeding you the shit. And it was jarring, not just because it was such clumsy exposition, but it was jarring because it was shot during the day. The rest of the movie's at night, and you only see the sun come up when they've made it. So having the film start out during the day, I think it didn't fit. So cutting all of that, all the exposition, and then having to come up with a clever way to do that exposition. What they did was they showed them on the subway going to the meet, dicking around, but still being kind of like tough guys a little bit, you know, and kind of their conversations, which weren't really spoon feeding the exposition to the audience. You just picked it up in drips and drabs. And then by the time the subway ride was over, you understood what was going on. Yeah. You can give people not a ton of information and still have them kind of be able to follow the movie. I thought that was a good choice. The second good choice, I think that kind of happened maybe by accident, was using the subway map to show their progress. It wasn't just like, here's how far they have to go, but it's like kind of, oh, we're here, so we have this much farther to go. For whatever reason, it just charted their progress between Central Park and Coney Island. And I don't know shit about now. I don't know where Coney Island is relative to Central Park.
Right.
You know, I don't know any of that shit, but I can follow the subway map and I know how close they are, you know, just from what they showed on screen. So using that as a framing device for their progress, I don't know who came up with that.
And the fact that they gave a shit to be like, well, they're on the train, so how do we stop the train? What would make what instance or you know, something that would happen that would make a subway train stop? Okay, a fire. Yeah. That's a real life thing that would happen that would stop a train. We got to write in a fire. Like they kind of thought of all those things. It was very flat. It was just like them talking at each other in the daylight, and that breaks the whole thing, because that makes the ending so much more impactful, because it gives you that A, that sense of we made it, and B, that sense of God, nowhere is safe when the rogues, you know, find them on their turf, and they, you know, are brazen enough to go to them there. It was all those little nuanced decisions. The DP's just like, well, it's going to be kind of rainy, and it's just so flat, like shooting on a New York alley sometimes. So let's wet the ground so it gives us some more natural lighting, because the light bounces off the puddles on the floor. Or when they're running away from the baseball furies, he's just like, we put lights in the trees. Why do we put lights in the trees? Just to light it better, you know, obviously, but they're not trying to hide it. They just added them, and your brain's just so like caught up in the emotion of what's going on. You don't care that there's just like spotlights in the trees as they're running by. So it was all these little fine-tuned details, and like you said, those major decisions. Probably a lot of gang films that came out, not just The Wanderers, right?
Oh,
yeah. So, and a lot of them wind up on your cult shelf, on your cult movie shelf. Fine, but this is the one. This is the one that people talk about.
Zooming in on Lynn Thigpen's mouth and only showing her mouth when she was talking on the radio was another, like, why would you do that?
All right now, for all you boppers out there in the big city, all you street people with an ear for the action, I've been asked to relay a request from the Gramercy Riffs.
Why would that be a thing you thought to do? And it works really well.
Yeah.
So, like, either you're just a super genius or you did that by accident. He was just like, yeah, just zoom in on her more, until it was like just her mouth on screen. That was like her iconic performance of her career, basically, you know?
Just being a mouth. I think there's a rumor out there that she didn't even know they were shooting her full. And then I think it was in post where they decided to, you know, go
tighten it up.
Yeah, full zoom. And she's like, okay. And I think it was James Remar's just like, this has now become like a transformative role, even if it doesn't show your entire face and body. And look what happened. It's one of the most memorable things. The chemistry between Michael Beck and Deborah Van Valkenburg, because that wasn't the original in the screenplay. That's not who was supposed to get together. It was supposed to be Tom Waits, played Fox, that got with her. Swan's character was supposed to get apprehended by some like homosexual gang, and then he was supposed to like fight his way out of it or something. Either way, it was completely written differently from what we got, and that's only solely because, well, maybe one of two things. A, because their on-screen chemistry was just so good between Michael Beck and Deborah Van Valkenburg, and also Tom Waits and Walter Hill were at each other's throats the whole time. Tom Waits was hired on to be like the face of the group, like he was the pretty boy. Everyone thought, back in the 1970s that he was the next James Dean, but for whatever reason, Walter Hill they did not get along, so he found a way to write his demise. And because you think about it, no one really dies as far as our main characters go, and Fox is just kind of literally thrown away so flippantly.
Yeah, it was a real jarring scene. It was like, yeah, people get tossed on railroad tracks by cops all the time, right? Like, it was just...
Yeah. I'm a sucker for factions. Like, I like anything that does that trope. Even like the Escape From movies. So a whole movie of that, and to be able to flesh out even the worst of them, because like I said, the Warriors themselves as a group is pretty unremarkable. And then you spend a lot of time with the orphans, and they're like the outcasts and kind of the D team. They're not even like the B team group. Even the choice with the other big ones, like the baseball Furies, not having them talk gives them this like horror movie expression to them. They have Kiss makeup, and they look like they're wearing Little League outfits, but they have to emote through all that, and they succeed through emoting through all that with these like crazy expressions and just literally this like hatred on their face, which is just so good.
I love that Paul Greco basically played his orphan character in every other role he did for the rest of his career. I thought that was pretty funny.
You think the orphans ain't with it? You think the orphans ain't well known?
We didn't say that.
Well, we got a heavy rep. You mess with us and you'll find that out.
Yeah, talking about face for radio. You got to lead the orphans.
How dare you talk about Raul from Cable Guy like that?
So this would become kind of like a franchise. It would go on to spawn like a video game.
New York City, 1979. These are the armies of the night.
Yo, guys, the Warriors are here!
These are the Warriors.
I never played it, but I heard good things. It's kind of like
it was basically Grand Theft Auto on foot.
Okay.
Or like Bully. It was one of those Rockstar games.
Yeah.
So like, if you didn't love Grand Theft Auto because it was a little unrealistic, Warriors was, it was a little better. It was a PS2 game, I think exclusively. But like it was fine. I rented it and played through it and did not regret that.
It was kind of in development hell for a while, but it looks like the rights have finally passed to Netflix for a TV series. Is this like a franchise that you would be not only willing but excited to return to the world of the Warriors?
No. Here's why.
Okay.
Do you set it now? In which case, no one has a gun?
Right. Well, there's guns in
like
here.
The more there were 2 guns in this movie. The more guns, the more this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So is it going to be people shooting at each other and like, who wants that? Okay. And if it's not, if it's set in the 80s, where do you shoot it?
Yeah.
Like I get it. You could do period pieces. Like no one's shooting Peaky Blinders in New York City right now. No one's stopping traffic to put up a facade of an old hardware store. I get it. But do you want something set in 1980 coming out right now? I don't know, man.
I don't know. Like I know that this is kind of a timeless story. Even it sounds funny because a lot of the outfits and everything are very dated, but the story itself has this timelessness about it. But yes, I don't think that it's going to feel as immersive now. Especially, and I don't want to say because of a Netflix budget, because I mean Netflix could pull off some shit. Maybe with the right person helming the project, it would be interesting. Because I do like I said, I like factions. I like these characters. It would be it would make for a urban style Game of Thrones, which I think I would at least be. It would pique my interest a little bit.
Okay, so. This was based on the Anabasta story. Had a very discrete beginning, middle, and end. You're at a place. You go to a place where you're not. You made it. How do you do 10 episodes of that? You would just write. This is just. You're just skinning some other drama that could have been any other property.
Yeah.
in the Warriors because back in the 1970s, you made a movie, and if it was good, you made money. It was great. You took some risks. Hollywood, all the people who were working at Paramount in the 1970s are dead, and their kids who went to business school took over. So it's run by a bunch of business school kids who they want the ROI on their money. They're not going to make anything risky. They want to make some safe shit, and they know that this worked in the 80s. Just remake RoboCop. You know, do we need to update any of the allegory? Fuck no. It's a robot cop. We'll show him as a person. We'll show him in the robot suit, and then we'll show him out of the robot suit. He's a robot cop.
70% of your movie's done. Yeah.
Yeah. So if they're just gonna lazily remake stuff because they want to get that nostalgia factor, and they want to pick something they think is safe because it's already got a built-in fan base, do we reward that kind of lazy shit? No. Come up with an original idea. You know, Netflix has some good original programming because it's good original programming. You know?
Yeah. And it does feel, because if this was a Netflix show, all it would have done was had a Lizzie's episode. It would have had an Orphans episode.
And it would have been, it would have been like the whole episode is their backstory.
Yeah.
And then it ends, the last 10 minutes is when they fight the Warriors.
Right. Yeah. So it would just be a super overinflated. Yeah, okay. I could see that. Where the movie was just so streamlined, and you're not bored for a second. You're not lost. It plays to the front of the room and the back of the room. Like everyone could kind of show up. And I guess that was kind of the issue when this film was released, is because for whatever reason, it got this reputation of having actual gangs show up, and they're like, this is our movie, you know. They use it as like a banner thing, and then you'd have like Bloods and Crips going to the same theater, and like riots and shootings and shit would happen, and it got this reputation because it was $4 million budget. It had a huge opening month, and then after that it started plummeting hardcore to where it only made $22 million in the box office, when it was on pace to kind of quadruple that because of the media press that it was getting. It's just like, it is unsafe to go to the theaters to go see the Warriors because you're going to get caught up in some shit. That legacy is kind of cool as well. You know, you don't want to have that Dark Knight stigma of some douchebag showing up thinking he's the Joker and blowing some away. But this had a little bit of a mystique to it, whether it was overblown by the media or not.
Yeah, it was kind of like, oh, it's going to be the next Rocky Horror where people are going to throw the hot dogs at the screen and then someone shoots someone right in the face. Oh, shit, they came out to play. Shit.
So, who would you recommend this movie for now? If someone has never seen The Warriors, how would you kind of pitch it to them?
I saw this movie in 2002.
Oh.
So to say that, like, this might not hold up, I don't know. I kind of think this movie does hold up. Kids like 13 and up, maybe. You know, people who like exciting films. You want to see why this is a cult movie. I mean, you guys talked about Streets of Fire before you talked about this movie. I think if you were compelled by the episode where Dana and John talked about Streets of Fire, you're already sold on this.
Yeah.
You know? This movie wasn't a comedy. There weren't jokes or gags, but it didn't take itself too seriously. I think it's the perfect mixture of action and levity, to the extent that really, I think you already know if you want to see this movie. I think if you see the poster and you're like, that's not for me, you're probably right. But
yeah.
If you wonder like why this is one of the most popular cult films of all time, give it a watch, and I think you'll pretty quickly figure out what it is about this movie that has made it last for so long and continue to get new fans.
I think Walter Hill is one of the most underrated action filmmakers, because you get to see some really well choreographed raw action with not even just like pulled out and wide where you could actually see the whole thing taking place, but in slow-mo sometimes, which is utilized like correctly. It's not just like a gimmick in this, where he was able to have fantastic action, great character. You have a love story in here, but this was a comic book film before the MCU or the X-Men franchise. This is the same tone and bones as your comic book movies today, which they were probably heavily influenced by the Warriors.
I think this was ahead of his time because you don't see much influence for the comic book movies they made in 1980. We had a piece of shit Captain America back then.
Yeah.
That didn't influence the MCU Captain America, but something about this movie resonated, I think, culturally, because I think there were people that were ready for it, and they didn't even know that they were waiting for this movie.
Yeah,
until they saw it. Yeah,
and it's not quite Streets of Fire. It's not a musical. It doesn't go full like Theater Kid. This still is, it's still grimy. It's still very bootstrappy, but I think both of them are great. If you like this, you'll probably like Streets of Fire. It holds up for all those reasons that you go see the Suicide Squad now and find enjoyment. It has that same kind of pulse and pace to it. So I would recommend it to pretty much everyone that likes that kind of film. That's our thoughts on the Warriors. Definitely go check it out. I think it's streaming still like everywhere. And it's a good entry level to cult films as well. Like I said, this is kind of the cult film. So if you like this, you might like, other non-mainstream films. But yes, Jason, everyone find you, sir?
If you head over to the Bird site, I am Jason E. Alt on there, and I have a link tree that links to all the other projects that I work on around the internet, which you may or may not be interested in.
All right. You could follow this very show at The Cult of Films. You could also follow me at John the Host. You could listen to this in podcast form on all your favorite podcasting platforms like iTunes, Spotify. Leave us baseball bats. Leave us, switchblades, or leave us Lizzies. Either way, we appreciate all of it, and you're welcome in the gang. So until next time,